for tuning in tonight. Here with me I have NAPIT's Paul Chaffers and Richard Townsend talking about the brand new publication, The On-Site Solutions. The book is due out in November. However, Paul and Richard are here tonight to give you a bit of an overview about what the guidance is about and all the exciting features that it's got in it. You will see that we've got a live Q&A as well, so if you've got any questions, please do ask away and they'll be able to answer them at the end if we've got time, and if they haven't, I'll make sure that they get an email reply to you in the upcoming week. So I'll pass over to you guys.
Okay, so we've been busy at NAPIT HQ. We're starting to produce documentation publications now. So this is our second book, following on from Code Breakers, and my colleague Paul, next to me, was the key author and wrote most of the book with help from our partners and cooperating organisations and individuals, our technical team, various bits and pieces. And in a nutshell, the book covers everything most electricians are going to need to do domestic and small, light, commercial, industrial systems. We're going to cover the legal requirements in the book, and we're going to go through these throughout the presentation, this seminar. We'll be covering installation requirements, design considerations, safe isolation, inspection and test, documentation, solar PV, EV charging, and smart homes, which are the 10 sections of the book. And we'll give you a quick buzz over the sort of things that we'll be covering in each of those sections. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Paul, who is the author of this new book, to take you in and cover legal requirements first off.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, it's just a quick webinar tonight to tell you about this publication. As with any good guidance, you need your legal requirements there, and it's in the front of the on-site solutions. And we cover all of the major statutory requirements such as CDM, health and safety, PPE, etc. Now, with any electrical work you do in any building, you're going to sort of come across all the different building regulations. Your work is going to be involved in making alterations to the fabric of the building, in which case this first image we've got there, you can see we're covering wall chases. It's bread and butter to you guys, you're doing it all the time, but there are requirements, so we've got them in there. Wall chases comes under structure, which is approved document A, and structure would also cover other stuff for timbers, roof, etc. So we've got all of the drawings for the latest guidance on drilling, which includes the latest Eurocode information.
Yeah, we've got all the latest knowledge requirements on that from NHBC, yep. Which is their latest guidance. We've also got requirements for smoke, fire emergency lighting, smoke and fire alarm systems, which are written with the latest 5389 Part 6. So we've got the most up-to-date smoke and fire detection kind of systems and information that are going to be useful to any kind of electricians carrying out that sort of work. And we cover the domestic and the industrial and commercial side. We're covering where we breach different fire barriers within buildings, how to go about that, how to make and seal and make sure you're not infringing any building regulations. This is important stuff. So we've gone to great pains to ensure that you've got all the information that you might need.
Okay, and as you can see there, we've got a ventilation example. There's quite a lot of requirements for ventilation. Whenever a building is altered, has a material change of use, or new builds, the work does become notifiable. And we have obviously a ventilation scheme here at NAPIT, which we can talk to you about if you want any more details. But for the practical side of it, you need to know the do's and don'ts for running the ducts and when you may need to use condensation traps, etc. All this guidance is in the book.
All laid out, really good figures, really good illustrations, and 7671 requirements, mate.
Okay, so section 2. So we've moved on from the sort of legal requirements of the building regulations, health and safety, etc. And we're starting to now explain the structure of BS 7671. I mean, most of the guys, when they're doing their work, they go straight to the part 7 or wherever. You know, if they're doing a caravan site, they go to that section or whatever. But we need to start understanding the fundamental requirements of the regs and all the assessments of general characteristics and all the things. So all that's explained. We explain the different types of paraffin and bonding there is, protective measures. It's all explained and it's all illustrated. Okay, so for example, the picture here, this is at the start of this section, we're talking about the definitions we use within the regs, and we'll start with talking about fault protection. So we're looking at basic protection, so an enclosure is basic protection, basic insulation is basic protection, and then we start talking about barriers and that. So this is how it's explained with a lot of text and a lot of diagrams.
We go into quite in-depth sort of explanations to try and explain earthing and bonding. It is something that a lot of people kind of struggle with, and it is a grey area. So we've tried to break down the differences between earthing and bonding, where we do it and where we shouldn't do it, where it's an issue and where it's not. So we covered earthing and bonding in quite considerable detail. We also take into consideration different types of earthing systems. So it's not all single phase. We have single phase, multi-phase, or polyphase, if we want to call it by its correct term, types of installations and the earthing systems required in those different kind of scenarios. This is very definitely not just a domestic book. It's very much aimed at light commercial and industrial, as well as the domestic market.
Okay, so when we start moving into section 3, this is where there's a lot of information here now, because what we're actually doing is looking at example installations, and we're going to be looking at a number of practical solutions for everyday situations. So we start off by showing all the components used. We'll be looking at all the different switchgear, protective devices, and different wiring methods that are used. They're all discussed in the book. This is where we start to bring in the new requirements for the 18th edition. So we'll be given a talk about AFDDs in there. There's SBDs are covered, RCD selectivity. This is all new stuff with the 18th edition. For example, the image we've got there now in this site guide, we've got all the different types of consumer units so that the reader can understand where all the changes are over the years. So this may particularly suit somebody who's new to the industry who may not be familiar with an older installation, so they can learn the history of how things have changed. And right up to date, we've got the 18th edition consumer units, and what they are really is there's a requirement now for RCCBs and things like that to have an overload protection, and we can't solely use diversity anymore. So the issue is, if you were to put a consumer unit straight onto the DNO supply and it was a 100 amp supply, are those devices now protected by that 100 amp fuse? So what a lot of the sort of bigger manufacturers are starting to do now is produce switchgear with a 100 amp rating, which you can see in the illustration there, to cover these new requirements. It's all explained in this section of the book.
Yeah, so with the switchgear that we explain, we're also breaking down some of the devices that we use. So we cover all the common types of overcurrent protective devices and types of switchgear. We explain how circuit breakers are made internally, what they're kind of looking for. So rather than just fit it and walk away, we're trying to get people on board with how these devices operate and work internally. It gives you a better understanding for when you come to put your installations together and your designs. But we also cover historic equipment. So we cover standard fuses, HRC fuses. We cover 3036 semi-enclosed fuses, because obviously they're not outlawed. We can still use them. So they're covered. So you may need to come and do some alterations and some additions, and those are already in place and may be quite functionally acceptable to stay in place. So we have given you advice for that. We also give advice on the new ARC fault detection devices coming forward. Obviously, that's all new stuff, and we have to be careful for parallel faults and series faults and arcs. It's something we need to look at. We go into it with fairly in depth, I believe, just to ensure that you're fully up to speed with what you're taking into account when you go and put a design together. Surge. We've all been amassed and emulsified in surge protection devices over the last year or so, but for a designer, it's a real headache. It's not just the incoming cable that they need to worry about. They need to worry about an awful lot more. They need to worry about the data cables coming in and the issues that they can bring in i.e. the importing surge into the building from a strike, or they may need internal switching issues which could cause devices to be rendered useless, and that could be valuable data, valuable equipment. So we've given a designer the kind of information and guidance they need to adequately protect their clients from surge and switching issues.
Excellent. Yeah, I mentioned we talk about a number of different installation methods and that. So throughout this document, we've given different examples. The example you can see there is where we're looking at external influences. So I think this was for a garage installation where you're going to have tools and things kicking about and the cables could get damaged. So we're showing the different types and ways of meeting this type of thing. Now, what was key in my mind when we were putting this guidance together were my vast experience of working in the industry, but also working for NAPIT inspections. I've done a number of years of going out and inspecting the members, and we would see different types of systems and different types of installations and different quotes and different things. And it was a sort of constant learning curve to be able to sort of explain to the members the pros and the cons of doing the different ways. And we've tried to wrap it up in this book so that, you know, there's some good advice given. For instance, in this image there, we're looking at meter towels. Now, on a lot of new build installations, there's a problem with meter towels. The meter box is outside, the consumer unit's inside, the towels have to come through the wall. What do you do with them? So a lot of guys think that it's quite acceptable just to run them up to the board because the towels are in the zone. But if you're using wiring in a zone, you have to also use a 30 milliamp RCD or mechanical protection, and that therefore you can see the regulation that we've quoted in that figure is mechanical protection, because it's not suitable to have a 30 milliamp RCD on meter towels to a consumer unit.
No, it takes, if we do that, we're then stepping on the toes of the regulations that require us to look at selectivity and diversity and splitting down different parts of the installation. If we've got one RCD up front, that kind of stuffs us for that, so we have to think of something else. This method allows us to adequately protect the cable and then think about division later on when we've got to the consumer unit.
Sure. We're also covering the new requirements for premature collapse. So we're all familiar with the requirement that cables have to be able to be supported so they're not liable to premature collapse in a fire. So we've given some clear guidance on there of different ways of doing installations to meet those requirements and what we deem to be safe and effective methods of installation.
Absolutely. So some design considerations. So Paul's going to take you through a few design considerations now and the thought processes that we went through when we put this book together.
Okay, yeah, in the design section here, in recent years, a few years ago, I sat the level 4 design qualification here at NAPIT. We run the 2396, the City and Guilds one, and it was kind of, it was quite good fun doing it. It's quite involved. If anybody wants any more information, then get in touch. But one thing that was apparent is it was hard to get all the information. You had to go to various different places to find the key information to do the calculations required to deal with that project. So I thought it'd be quite nice if we could cover it in full in the NAPIT on-site solutions. So we've gone through all of the cable calcs and we've given worked examples of how you apply the different equations to get through the cable design process. We've also in this section covered different installation methods. So we've talked about first fix requirements, second fix requirements. As I mentioned earlier, you'd go on to one site and the guy would say, oh, you've got to first fix cables this way. You go on to another site and they'd say you've got to do it this way. So we've given the clear approach in this book on how things should be done. And we've covered a number of installation types: kitchen, showers, garages, outbuildings. There's advice for all of these different installations. We've also talked about buried cables. We've given you tables with the depths for different environments. So it's all there, all together, all in the one book. Okay, central heating components and controls are also explained. There's you know, it's systems that people are working with every day of their life. Some electricians are quite happy and familiar with them, and others are not. So we've given all the information explained with wiring diagrams how to deal with those systems. So we've got some images here. If you just click the next one, Richard. These two here are the section on energy let-through. So I'm trying to explain there how you can use manufacturers' data charts, and you can look at cable designs and work out to see whether your cables are correctly sized to be able to deal with the energy let-through that the protective device lets through into that system.
We're also starting to look at the different types and methods of looping in ceiling roses, because it's a common practice now to use what we call a neutral loop method, whereby the switching for the neutrals are brought down to the switches, because it's easier that way, easier to test, easier to install. There are 2 or 3 different ways, and there are some historic ways. So we've tried to cover the historic ways in an easy to read sort of picture kind of system, and we've also tried to cover the newer, more modern neutral looping methods, which is got to be ideal for an electrician. Come up against something that's existing and you do an alteration, you've got the information on what the existing wiring systems were back in the day. It just takes away some of that aggravation when you've got to try and look around for stuff. We're also starting to look at the different dangers with fitting recessed downlighters. They're really easy to pop in, but there's a bit more to it than that. We're looking at their fire stopping abilities, their sound, we're looking at sound deadening, we're looking at all sorts of things. So it's not just shove it in and hope, and it's not just fire that we need to worry about when we're fitting recessed downlighters. There's a whole host of building regulations that they have to comply with. We're also looking at different types of wiring and how to configure them, isolators, fan switches. We've covered everything really, so there's no real excuse from certainly a domestic scenario. You wouldn't be able to wire anything up with what we've put in and the different kinds of explanations.
And a lot of our members have apprentices as well.
Absolutely, so, it's ideal for apprentices.
So you've got to cover all aspects of the trade, even though some of us guys and many of you watching will understand the basics of wiring switches. For your apprentices and stuff like that, they will need the guidance. It's here, it's all in one book.
Absolutely.
Oh, I mentioned about the central heating earlier. Here's an example page from there. So we've covered different types of property, different kinds of systems, what the different components are, and how to wire and configure them. You may be able to pick out in that drawing there that where we used to just take the switch wire from the wire and send it to the boiler, a lot of boilers now require a permanent feed so that they can have their pump overrun. And if you don't supply that to a boiler, the manufacturer's warranty can be an issue. So we've given the latest, we've worked with industry partners to give the latest guidance on this.
We've also given you, if you like, areas of the regulations that require specific depths for cables being buried and what those are. We've also given you a generic, what we or the industry would say is a normal depth based around what we'd normally do historically. But we've also covered a table, what you should or shouldn't do, things to look out for, how to trench properly, and the different depths and tapes and where we're going to put things in. So it is very much in depth. It's way more than most would probably need, but it's there if you need to. As we said, this is not just a domestic guide, it's for industrial and commercial also. We also cover the issues around PME systems and supplying buildings outside and the issues we have with PME systems. So what we've done is we've broken down all the different variations of supplying outbuildings and buildings away from the main source and the main incoming source, TTs, TNS, TNCS, the dangers with them, how to get around that, what the issues are, perception shocks and all of those things. So we've covered all of that in some quite detailed approach. So it should give you a good understanding of what you should or shouldn't do and get rid of some of those myths about PME and TT and what you can or can't do when you're putting an outside installation together.
Yeah.
So, safe isolation of electrical supplies.
Okay, yeah, this is just a small section here. It's got to be covered. You guys have got to keep yourself and your clients safe. Just get the click over, please, Rich. We've covered a number of parts here. We've got the legislation, the regulation. We've given the procedures both for commercial as well as domestic, permits to works discussed. There's a number of other things discussed in here. We're talking about when it's acceptable to switch a neutral or not, different types of earthing systems. So yeah, there's a lot there, and we've given diagrams every step of the way.
It's actually really topical at the minute, safe isolation. Lots of people have, it's in all the social media. It is a big, really big, important thing. It's our bread and butter as electricians, and we need to make sure that we are safe. We don't go to work to get an electric shock. We go to work to earn a crust and come home again. So we have to be very, very mindful of the dangers associated with not doing this properly. So, inspection and testing. Well, it's pretty much every part of 7671 Part 6 is covered, and which then covers all of the other parts. How to prove metallic surfaces deemed to be an extraneous conductive part. There are a few issues with that. Some people have a different view. So we've tried to cover the basic 22 kilo ohms and how to calculate that and where that all comes from. We've got tables of conductor resistance for verifying conductor lengths. So when we ask to look at how long a piece of CPC is or an earthing conductor is, we can know, because we know what that resistance should be over that length. Ready reckoner tables, ideal for guys doing designs. All of the tests are fully explained and illustrated. Certification requirements, frequency of inspection tables, we cover all of those. It's very similar to the risk-based approach that we use in Codebreaker, and they've just been copied over to this book. But we cover pretty much everything. We've got some test and inspection figures which are new for us, but they are absolutely, everything is covered. We can see them all popping up there, R1, R2 over 4. We've also got some 3-phase inspection and test there, because we cover 3-phase inspection and test. We've got different methods of calculating ZE for an earth electrode. We've got the fall-in potential method, and we've got the earth fault loop impedance test method. So we pretty much cover everything in Part 6 and the inspection and test. It is vital for us. We have to make sure equipment and all of our installations are safe before we energize them. So we've gone to great lengths to ensure that we really pack this section with everything you could possibly need. Which brings us to
it's over to the documentation side of things, really. What I tried to cover here is everything from the initial survey through to completion. As I said earlier, I spent a lot of time working for NAPIT, looking at different contractors over the years and different approaches, and some are very good paperwork and some not so good. And what we've tried to do here is cover the basics of what you should be looking at covering and different advice on how you can deal with it in a simple way. It's bullet lists there, deal with, so you don't miss anything and you make sure that you're covered, and there's not going to be a problem for yourself. So that's all in there. What your CDM responsibilities are, that's covered in there. We've also looked at the labelling, because labelling sort of comes hand in hand with that part of the end part of the job where you're commissioning and testing and you're going to hand over the job to the client. So that's all covered in there. And then lastly, the certifications. You can see there's a lot of guidance in there. There's bullet points there about the estimates and contracts. There's typical symbols that you may see on architects' drawings, and we've given a number of samples of certification and what that looks like.
Great. So we're now working on to the more specialist section. So we've got a section on solar PV, because obviously that's key given our power shortages coming up. So
the solar PV section, we wanted to put this in on its own, because it's the kind of thing that if you're an inspector and you're out there but you're not sure about solar PV systems, or you're an installer and you want to brush up on what the requirements are, rather than go and hunting through the whole solutions book, you can come to the section that's relevant to you. And let's say you've got to shut the system down, you're doing a safe isolation of the consumer unit, but you're aware that the sun's shining and there's still PV being produced. How do you shut it down safely? We've given the startup and the shutdown procedures, identified all the components. We talked about DC feedback with regards to RCD selection, which type of RCD you need and what you should be looking for regarding that. All of that's in there in tables. DC isolators, they're different to AC isolators. Any MCS contractors here watching this, I know there is a different requirement, but not all inspectors will if they're not familiar with solar PV. So we've given some advice on that as well. All the labelling requirements are in there, so it's just not just BS 7671. There's some advice on other things that you'll need to consider with regards to solar systems. For example, this is a a sort of typical PV isolator, a DC isolator, I should say. And if you can see there that you see the positive goes in, it goes across one pole, then it goes up through a pre-assembled jumper cable and back up through another pole. So the arc is being quenched over 2 poles and not just over one. Then there's various configurations for different systems and different isolators, but this is just showing you a typical example. And then we talk about the requirements for schematic drawings and shutdown procedures and that. So we're giving you examples in the book of what you should be looking for on site. And lastly, the labelling's covered as previously mentioned.
EV charging, hot topic.
Well, the EV charging thing is very current here. We're doing a lot of courses here at the moment. Everybody's wanting to know about, you know, what the opportunities are and how to get involved in it. And there are a lot of requirements to certain tasks with EV charging. So we've covered them in this section, and we've given a lot of solutions, whereas a lot of guys are sort of saying, how do I do this, how do I do that? We've covered it in this section of the book. We talk about the earthing arrangements. There's a lot of discussion about what type of earthing you can and can't use, the different types of RCDs, because some of this equipment, the batteries, the DC can leak back through, so we have to have the correct type of RCD. We talk about if we're using different earthing arrangements, let's say we've put an earth rod in outside, can we get any simultaneous contact, the shock risks? So
the favourites, the outside light tap.
Yeah,
be careful with these things.
So it's all discussed in the book. Loading issues. There's a lot of different things to consider here. We give all the rated diversity factors for consumer units, so that if you're putting in a heavy constant load such as EV, you know how to set up your consumer unit so there's not going to be any infringement on the manufacturer's instructions. We're going to talk about load management and how some different types of charging equipment can deal with that. We're also looking at isolating transformers. That is a protective measure.
Absolutely.
And as you can see, you've got sample illustrations that clearly show how to separate earthing systems, etc., etc.
We go into great detail to try and help you see all the different types of system that you can possibly wire up, put in, install. We've got one popped up there that gives you an idea of the things to look out for when we're looking at things that are installed after. So we've got a light there, we've got an outside tap. These have got issues with the type of installation, the type of protective devices we have to have. Great for domestic, we need to know that. We also cover RCDs. So there are lots of different types of RCDs. We need to be concentrating on a specific variant for EV charging. And we also have to look out for the fact that some manufacturers design EV only RCDs, so it won't be called a type B, it will be called a type EV. Again, this is just a minefield, so we've tried to give as much advice as we possibly can. We've given all the different advice that's possibly currently available on the different types of connectors, plugs, socket arrangements for EVs, not only in the domestic market but also in the industrial more industrial market, where we've got forecourt devices, or we've got devices at filling stations, rest stops and that kind of thing, car parks, because yet again we've got a difference in manufacturers and a difference in vehicles, so it all has to be covered. So it is a big thing to try and get our heads around, and it's, I think 2030 is the government target to get 50% of vehicles EV being sold. So EV is going to be a massive thing in the UK, so we're trying to gear up now for it.
Okay, lastly, this is section 10.
Indeed.
It's an introduction to smart home installations. If you've been keeping up on what we've been doing on these webinars, we did have a smart home webinar earlier in the year. I think it was this year.
It was.
So we're fully aware that this stuff is not going away. More and more people are using these voice control things. More and more people are wanting to turn bits of kit off with their phone and iPads. And what we don't want to do is have our members falling behind with the technology. So please forgive me if you're fully up to speed with things, but not everybody is. So we want to give an introduction. We want to explain what the different types of systems are. So it's mainly based on talking about the IoT products, and we've given some tables there of different products, explain them so that when you're talking to your customers, you've got a better level of understanding when you're dealing with them. We've given a few images of the different types of kit that's available. So there's some central heating kit there. If you wanted to split a building up into different zones, you can do it in a smart way as opposed to doing it in a manually plumbing way. There's some wireless solutions if you want to put extra switches on here and there and you don't want to run the cables, the solutions are there.
So that's on-site solutions in a nutshell. So it's our own brand, new publication. We've got a pre-order price for members at $19.50, non-members $21.50. It's available autumn 2019. I think we're looking for a Sandown Alex launch.
We are. I mean, you can take advantage of this sort of early price there, but we just wanted to give you the update on what it was all about. So when you see out there in the trade press, you know all about it. We had the code breaker out and that's doing really well. And it gives the inspector all the knowledge that they need for EICRs. We needed an installation guide and we've got it in this on-site solutions. Just lastly, before we go over to questions, Fran will be in a minute with a question. So I just wanted to give you an update on what we've been doing this year. We've been going around doing our Expo technical roadshows. We have a number of manufacturers that are with us. So it's like a mini trade show. You can see some of them on the bottom there. And we've been covering surge protection devices. We've been covering electric vehicle charging, and we've been covering coding with the code breaker. These sessions are free of charge. Anybody can attend. You just need to go to the NAPIT Expo site to register for your ticket. So if you're in the country near any one of those venues, please go on and book yourself a ticket. You get a free goodie bag when you arrive, and you also get a CPD certificate. It only takes a morning and it's quite good fun. We're getting good feedback from it. Don't worry if you're not near one of those, because we're planning on doing it all again next year. We'll have new topics and we'll be going right around the country again next year with a full suite of new presentations.
So I think this brings us into some questions. Fran's just going to bring some stuff in. Have I pressed the right button? Video only.
Yeah.
Some questions.
Okay, so thanks for that, both of you. We've got a few questions tonight. So the first one is the book only for domestic installations?
No, we've made it quite clear, and we were very careful when we wrote it and put it together that we catered light industrial and commercial and domestic. So it's not going to be all things to everyone if you're heavily into lots and lots of M&E, but from a light commercial and industrial perspective, should cover most things that you're going to be useful to you or you're looking for.
Okay. Second question, do you cover the risk assessments for surge protection?
Yeah, risk assessment, well, there's a couple of things there actually. There's the risk assessment with regards to what the likelihood of a transient coming in on the supply to the building. That's covered. We break down the formula and explain what all the different parts are. We give some definitions of what an urban and suburban is. We've also got all the sort of examples of the types of buildings where you may need that. So the risk assessment is covered, but there's also NAPIT have an SPD risk declaration form, I think we call it. And we've got an example of that in there, and that's for the sort of caveat that the regs does say for domestic properties where there's not significant value, you may be able to omit the SPD. So we've given some advice on that, and we've also created a form that the members can download free of charge from the members area to help them record the fact that they have gone through it with their client. In case the client says they're not interested in surge, there's some sort of documentation to prove that they didn't just omit it from the quote, they did discuss it. So it's all in there, and yes, the forms are available.
Okay. Is the documents in the book also available on the NAPIT website and the NAPIT desktop?
Where we've got new forms and certification, and we've got anything that's peculiar to on-site solutions, they'll either be on desktop or available from on our website or PDF form in some format at some point. Most of them are already on there. Those that are not will be made available or integrated into desktop if they're required to do so.
Okay, two more questions. The first one, how many pages is in the book in total? It's
just being finalised, but it's about 330, is it? Maybe
it's about 330.
330 odd, which is for it's A5, isn't it?
It's A5 ring
Yeah.
bound again with the plate. It's the same, exactly the same look as Codebreaker.
Same
gauge of paper.
Yeah. So if anyone is familiar with a Codebreaker, that's quite a chunky document, and that's about 170, 180 pages. This is almost double, so it's going to be a
Big lump.
a big lump of a document.
Okay. And the last question that we have from one of our members was, what about submains in domestic properties? Do these have to be RCD protected?
Well, submains, obviously it all depends on the cabling of where it's going and what type of submain it is. So we can have submains from the mains position over to the consumer unit, and we can have submains from a consumer unit outwards. And the thing is with submains, if you can avoid using RCDs, you're so much better for it. Okay. So you may not be able to avoid it if it's in a TT environment where you need an RCD for fault protection. Then you may need an RCD to cover the fault protection aspects, but you'd be looking at a higher trigger value of maybe 100 or even a 300 milliamp, and maybe even possibly a time delayed solution, so you can cascade down through. And I believe we have covered submains and RCD protection in the solution. So it's a good question, but without knowing the specifics of what's at that site, it's difficult to say yes or no. But if you can get away with the design of not using the RCD by using a suitable wiring system, an SWA cable run in the correct fashion, it's not buried behind the, anywhere that's going to get damaged. You've got the correct cable, it's all earthed up correctly, and you can get away with not using it. You're so much better, because then you can meet the selectivity requirements a little bit easier. Would you agree, Rich?
I would, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, if you're going to go and then supply another consumer unit and you already got one RCD up front, as we've already spoken about, it kind of scuppers your division of installation down. So when you start splitting your circuits down, you've only really got the amount of leeway you've got from your upfront RCD, which isn't very good. So avoid it if you can. If you can't, you've got no options. Try and do something else. Upgrade the size and the size of the RCD if you can.
I mean, I think the advantage we've had with this publication is that where we've released it sometime after the 18th being released, we've had chance as a technical committee to discuss the new requirements with regard to selectivity, RCDs, consumer units, all the new things that came about, the AFDDs, the SPDs. We've had a chance to decide as an organisation what the best approach is and put it into this publication. So hopefully the members will find it very useful.
Great.
Well, that pretty much brings us to the end. Thank you all for watching. It's been a pleasure to do this seminar for you. If you've got any questions, if you can let Fran have them, then we can probably sort something out and get some answers to you later on. Failing that, we will be launching the book hopefully at Sandown. So if you're in that area, please pop along. We've got a much increased stand and there's an awful lot going on. We've got more seminars than we would normally do. So pop along, Sandown, say hello, and maybe pick up your copy. Thanks for watching. See you all at the next one.